Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I, 25 female, have always been close to my brother. Being only 2 years apart, we grew up doing everything together. When he had his kids, I was overjoyed to be an aunt. I work from home, so I became the go-to babysitter for my niece, 4 female, and nephew, 6 male. At first, it was wonderful. I'd watch them maybe once or twice a month when my brother and sister-in-law had date nights or appointments. They'd always give me advance notice, respect my time, and pay me fairly. The kids are sweet and well-behaved, so I genuinely enjoyed our time together. Things started changing about 6 months ago. The requests became more frequent, often last minute, and sometimes they'd be late coming back. I'd express my concerns, but my brother would brush them off with excuses about traffic or meetings running long. I kept agreeing because I love those kids, and I knew childcare was expensive. Then came New Year's Eve. I had plans with my friends for a house party. We'd been organizing it for weeks, and I was especially excited because my crush would be there. My brother called me 3 days before New Year's Eve. He started by asking for a huge favor. When I asked what he needed, he explained about needing a babysitter for New Year's Eve because they got invited to an amazing party at the Grand Hotel. I told him I couldn't do it because I already had plans. That's when my sister-in-law joined the call, begging me to help because they couldn't find anyone else. She even offered to pay double. My brother chimed in, trying to downplay it by saying it was just one night and promising they'd be back by 1 a.m. My friends were blowing up my phone, asking about final party preparations, but I felt guilty. After 20 minutes of them begging and promising they'd be back early, I agreed. New Year's Eve started fine. The kids and I made cookies, played games, and watched movies. As midnight approached, I started checking my phone more frequently. No messages. At 12:15 a.m., I sent a text asking if everything was okay and checking when they'd be back. No response. At 12:45 a.m., I texted again asking if they were on their way. By 1:30 a.m., I was getting worried and sent another message saying this wasn't funny and asking them to please respond. At 2:15 a.m., I sent another text mentioning that I'd called 8 times and even the party venue wasn't answering. I was getting frantic texts from my friends. They'd seen my crush kissing someone else at midnight. I'd missed everything, and my brother wasn't even responding. They finally stumbled in at 4 a.m., reeking of alcohol and giggling. I confronted them about where they'd been and told them I'd been calling for hours. My brother, slurring his words, told me to relax and explained they'd gone to an after-party, saying it was awesome. When I reminded him about their promise to be back by 1, my sister-in-law, who could barely stand straight, dismissed my concerns by saying it wasn't like I had anything important going on anyway. My brother agreed with her, asking what the big deal was since I'm always home anyway. That's when I snapped. I told them how they'd been taking advantage of me for months, broke their promise, ignored my calls, and were now acting like my time meant nothing. I declared I was done and told them to find another babysitter. My brother tried to dismiss my feelings, saying I was just being dramatic because I had no life. I fired back, telling him I did have a life, and from now on, it wouldn't revolve around covering for their irresponsibility. I also demanded triple payment for the night since they were 3 hours late. When my sister-in-law called this ridiculous because they'd already offered double, I threatened to tell our mom about how they drove home drunk with their kids' car seats in the back. They paid me triple, and I used that money to book a weekend spa trip with my friends. My brother kept calling and texting, trying to guilt me into babysitting again, but I stood my ground. 2 weeks later, I heard from my mom that they had to cancel their weekly date nights because professional babysitters were too expensive and not as flexible as me. I heard they had to skip a couples retreat because no babysitter would agree to overnight stays after checking their references. Turns out I wasn't the first sitter they'd pulled this stunt with. Now they're complaining to the family about how hard it is to find good help these days. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying my free time and have even started dating someone new, not my old crush, but someone who actually respects my time. I came to America 15 years ago with nothing but 2 suitcases and a dream. My parents had sacrificed everything to send me here for my education, selling their small restaurant back home to afford my first year of college. I promised them I wouldn't let their sacrifice go to waste. Those first few years were brutal. I worked 3 jobs while studying engineering, morning shifts at a cafe, evening shifts at a restaurant, and weekend gigs as a tutor. I lived in a tiny studio apartment, ate instant noodles more times than I care to remember, and barely slept. But I graduated with honors, and a major tech company offered me a position right out of college. 10 years of hard work, countless overtime hours, and several promotions later, I finally felt secure enough to treat myself to something special. I'd always dreamed of owning a Porsche, and after months of research and saving, I bought a beautiful black 911. It wasn't the latest model, but it was mine, paid for with every extra hour and sacrifice I'd made. That day started like any other. I stopped at my favorite cafe for my morning coffee before heading to work. I was a regular there, and the baristas knew my usual order. I was inside for maybe 10 minutes, chatting with the staff about their weekend plans. Then I heard the commotion outside. At first I thought I was hallucinating. There was a woman, probably in her 50s, literally jumping up and down on the hood of my car like it was a trampoline. Her expensive-looking handbag was swinging wildly as she bounced, leaving scratches all over the paint. I rushed outside, my coffee forgotten on the counter. I yelled at her to get off my car. She stopped jumping but stayed standing on the hood, her heels making deep dents in the metal. She asked if this was my car, her voice dripping with contempt. When I confirmed it was and demanded she get down immediately, she launched into a tirade. She started screaming about how dare I have something like this while real Americans were living on the streets. She was screaming now, drawing a crowd of onlookers. When I told her I'd worked hard for this car and threatened to call the police, she accused me of stealing it or dealing drugs, claiming there was no way an immigrant like me could afford it legally. I was already dialing 911 when she started jumping again, this time with even more force. I quickly explained to the dispatcher that there was a woman jumping on my car, vandalizing it, and shouting racist things at me. The cafe staff had come outside by now, phones out, recording everything. One of the baristas stepped forward and announced they were filming everything, pointing out that they all knew me as a regular customer who worked in tech. This only enraged the woman more. She started shouting about how they were all enabling immigrants who were taking jobs, houses, and now driving luxury cars, while Americans suffered. The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers approached carefully, ordering her to step down from the vehicle. She responded by demanding to know if they were going to let immigrants get away with this, insisting that I didn't deserve the car. After the officers gave her a final warning to step down, which she ignored, they moved to help her down. That's when she completely lost it. She tried to kick one officer in the face while screaming about police brutality. It took both officers to get her down and into handcuffs, all while she thrashed and yelled about her rights as a real American. The damage to my car was extensive, deep dents in the hood, scratches everywhere from her bag and shoes, and a cracked windshield from where she'd stamped particularly hard. But the cafe's security cameras and the staff's phone videos caught everything. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had a mental episode, but the judge wasn't buying it. She ended up getting charged with vandalism, assault on a police officer, and a hate crime enhancement due to her racist tirade. The judge ordered her to pay for all damages to my car, plus additional punitive damages. When they ran her background, they found this wasn't her first racist outburst. She'd been fired from her job 6 months earlier for similar behavior. She had to sell her house to pay for the damages. I heard she was living with her sister and complaining on social media about how immigrants ruined her life. The irony of her ending up houseless after screaming about Americans living on the streets wasn't lost on anyone. My car was in the shop for weeks getting repaired, but the cafe gave me free coffee for a year after that incident. The staff there became like family, always looking out for my car when I stopped by. I never planned to join the Navy, but life has its way of steering you in unexpected directions. After my parents lost their restaurant during the 2008 financial crisis, I spent my teenage years helping them rebuild by working in various kitchens. That experience led me to culinary school, but the mounting student debt forced me to look for alternatives. The Navy recruiter's pitch about becoming a military cook while having my education paid for seemed like the perfect solution. 3 years into my service, I found myself deployed on a ship as the night shift cook. The schedule was brutal, working from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., but I took pride in my work. My small team consisted of just me and 3 others, while the day shift was fully staffed with 6 cooks and 9 attendants. Despite being understaffed, we managed our responsibilities well, focusing mainly on prep work for the next day's meals. One week, we had a major sanitary inspection coming up while we were out at sea. Everyone was on edge, especially the day shift supervisors who seemed determined to make our lives harder. The day shift supervisor approached me and ordered my team to deep clean all the cooking equipment that night, specifically mentioning the ovens, grills, and all the kettles. When I pointed out that night shift barely uses that equipment and that we mainly do prep work for them, asking if their team could handle some of it during the day, they dismissed my concerns. They rudely stated that night shift never does anything anyway, and that it was now our responsibility. The other supervisors nodded in agreement, smirking at each other. That's when I decided they needed to learn a lesson about respecting the night shift. Instead of starting the cleaning immediately, my team and I focused on our usual prep work first. We cut everything needed for the next day's meals and handled our regular duties. As breakfast time approached, that's when I began my malicious compliance. I filled all the large kettles with water and cleaning solution, then submerged every single oven rack in them to remove the burnt-on residue. With the kettles occupied and the oven rack soaking, I moved on to deep cleaning the grills. The morning crew arrived to find every major piece of cooking equipment either being cleaned or completely unusable. The day shift supervisor stormed over, demanding to know what I thought I was doing and where they were supposed to cook breakfast. I replied that I was following their orders and deep cleaning everything as instructed. They angrily pointed out that I was supposed to be done by now, but I reminded them that they hadn't specified a completion time and that I was being thorough, just like they wanted. The situation quickly escalated when hundreds of hungry sailors showed up for breakfast, only to find no food being served. The day shift supervisors were frantically trying to figure out how to cook without any usable equipment. Soon enough, the executive officer of the ship came down to investigate the situation. He was a tall, intimidating man who didn't tolerate nonsense. The day shift supervisor immediately tried to blame me, claiming that I had deliberately sabotaged their breakfast service by making all the equipment unusable. When the executive officer asked if this was true, I explained that I was following direct orders from the day shift supervisors to deep clean all cooking equipment. I mentioned that they had insisted it had to be done by night shift, despite us rarely using this equipment, and that we normally focus on prep work. The executive officer asked the supervisors if my explanation was correct. They shifted uncomfortably before nodding. He then spelled out the situation, asking if they had really ordered the understaffed night shift to clean equipment they barely use, refused to help when asked, and didn't even consider how this would impact breakfast service. The supervisors stayed silent as the executive officer berated them, calling it the stupidest thing he'd heard all week. He questioned their judgment and announced new rules. From now on, each shift would be responsible for cleaning their own equipment. He finished by warning them that any more petty behavior would result in them scrubbing toilets instead of running his galley before dismissing everyone. The day shift supervisors spent the next few weeks with much more reasonable expectations of the night shift, and I never heard another comment about us never doing anything. My parents decided to try for another child after I started high school, and they ended up with not one but 2 beautiful girls. The age gap is pretty significant, 15 years between my youngest sister and me, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Last summer, we took our first family vacation since the little ones were born. My parents had been saving up for a trip to Disney World, wanting to make it special for all of us. The vacation itself was magical, but the flight home, that's where things got interesting. The airline had somehow messed up our seating assignments. Instead of all 5 of us sitting together, my parents and sisters got 3 seats in one row, while I was seated across the aisle in a window seat. Between me and my family sat 2 older women, probably in their 60s, who had no idea we were related. The flight started okay, but about an hour in, my baby sister started crying. Not just regular fussy baby crying, we're talking full-on, inconsolable wailing. My parents tried everything, bottles, pacifiers, walking up and down the aisle, but nothing seemed to work. The poor thing's ears were probably hurting from the pressure. I quietly muttered to myself about wishing I could help my sister, watching helplessly from across the aisle. The 2 women next to me started getting visibly annoyed. The one directly beside me kept huffing and puffing, shooting dirty looks across the aisle. She complained to her friend about how ridiculous it was that someone would bring such a young baby on a plane. Her friend agreed, commenting that some parents were just inconsiderate. I bit my tongue initially. Yes, it was annoying, but what could anyone do? The flight attendants even started handing out complimentary earplugs to nearby passengers. Most people accepted them gratefully and tried to make the best of the situation. But then, the woman next to me crossed a line I couldn't ignore. She turned to her friend and suggested that someone should strangle the baby. Her friend laughed along, making a disturbing joke about opening a window. My blood ran cold. Were they seriously joking about hurting a 1-year-old? My 1-year-old sister? I gripped my armrest tightly but decided to wait. The perfect opportunity for revenge would come soon enough. Finally, after what seemed like forever, my sister calmed down as we began our descent. When we landed, being in the back of the plane meant we had to wait quite a while to deplane. That's when I decided to execute my plan. I called over to my mom, offering to hold my sister since she seemed happy now. My mom handed her over and I propped her on my hip right next to the 2 women. I started playing peekaboo with her, making her giggle that infectious baby laugh. The woman who had made the strangling comment froze. Her face went from confusion to horror as realization dawned. Her friend started stammering, immediately trying to salvage the situation by commenting on how precious the baby was and asking about her age. I responded with exaggerated sweetness while bouncing my sister, confirming her age and making a pointed comment about how adorable she was, especially when not crying on planes. The first woman's face turned bright red. She suddenly became very interested in her phone, trying to pretend she hadn't spent the last few hours threatening violence against an infant. At baggage claim, I spotted them again, hovering near our carousel. I made sure to walk past them with my sister, who was now curiously looking at their colorful luggage. I spoke to my sister, deliberately loud enough for them to hear, assuring her that I wouldn't let anyone hurt her and making a pointed comment about how some people just don't know how to behave on planes. The woman practically sprinted to the other side of the carousel, dragging her friend with her. They grabbed their bags and practically ran out of the airport, all while I stood there, gently rocking my sister and wearing the biggest smile. Every time I tell this story at family gatherings, my parents can't believe they missed the whole drama unfolding right across the aisle. But I'll never forget the look on that woman's face when she realized the stranger next to her was actually the big sister of the baby she'd threatened. Some people really need to think before they speak, especially when they're stuck on a plane with their target's family members. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.